Tilde, let's talk today about the recent resurgence in interest around female-only parking spaces, and how from inception to implementation to result demonstrates rather aptly the God of the Gaps methodology of modern feminism. So we'll start with the most recent case here in China. We'll look at a couple of other examples, and then we'll extend our gaze outwards to the concept of female-only transport in general. We'll look at the reasoning behind why these ideas came forth, and then finally we will conclude with why it is so clearly evident that you cannot do right for doing wrong. Let's go. So interest in female-only parking spaces has been rekindled recently with their introduction in areas of China. The most notable feature of these female-only parking spaces is that they are 50% wider than other car parking spaces. And this single fact in itself has caused a little bit of backlash, with some people believing that it is a societal endorsement of the negative stereotype that women are bad at parking. Now, keeping in mind that these spaces are 50% larger than a normal parking space, and the message that we are being told with this is that women are just as capable as men of parking their vehicles, and thus offering them extra space to do so is insulting, and then featuring this image on your article. Oh, sweet irony that even with all of that extra space, this individual could still not manage to be within the lines. But that's very much besides the point. This is not, after all, the first time that we have heard about female-only parking spaces. South Korea, for instance, in 2014 spent more than £50 million adding a female touch to Seoul City. Some of the female-only parking spaces were indeed made larger, but most of them weren't. The original idea of the women-only parking spots being installed in the past was as a public safety measure. The spaces usually designated near entrances or exits in poorly lit car parks, to ensure that women felt safer when travelling to and from their vehicles. And this was a similar case in Germany, with certain areas legally stipulating that 30% of the space in any particular car park must be designated specifically for women. And oftentimes these spaces would once again be made larger. And this of course attracted the same criticism, with some people coming to the conclusion that this was an implication that women were inferior drivers to men. However, in the 1990s, German women were actually voicing their concern about retrieving their cars from dimly lit lots. So once again, these larger spaces, these women's-only parking spaces, were created as a deterrent for sexual assault, by placing all of them in well-lit areas that were close to public spaces or building entrances. The expansion of the car parking spaces was to enable more space between the vehicles. This is actually something in line with a lot of feminist demand around keeping women safe and allowing women to feel safe when walking alone at night. The idea being that if these women-only spaces are larger, the cars further apart in better lit areas, this would deter would-be sexual predators from hiding in the spaces between cars in order to attack women.
Walking alone at night is definitely something I try to avoid as much as I can.
I dial 911 and have it ready as I'm walking.
I'll put my keys in between my knuckles and just be like Wolverine, ready to go.
I carry around a pocket knife.
According to some criminologists, women who walk in or through public places after a certain hour are constantly thinking they are in danger of being attacked. It has been shown that women perceive themselves as more vulnerable, weaker, and slower on foot than men. In fact, fear varies by person's sense of vulnerability and how serious dangers are perceived to be. The more a person perceives the danger of falling victim to a major crime to be a real possibility, the more fearful he or she will be. Women appear to be the group most affected by urban dangers because they feel vulnerable to sexual violence, which to them constitutes a serious crime, which results in a so-called shadow effect, the constant fear of sexual attack, influencing all aspects of their lives. And what's rather interesting about this particular nighttime element is that Hila Koskela studied women's feelings of being unsafe in the city of Helsinki, where summer nights are very short and light, and winter days extremely long and dark. It turns out that Finnish women do not differentiate between the danger of being out during winter and summer nights. It is therefore not a lack of light that causes women to be apprehensive, but the social dimension of night. So it would appear that nighttime and darkness, even isolation in and of itself, is not inherently something that women should be scared of. Indeed, criminal statistics being taken across even a number of decades consistently indicates that women are the safest demographic, almost universally, and that so-called stranger danger attacks, that is, attacks by someone that the woman does not know, is one of the least likely events to happen. And yet, these incentives, female-only car parking spaces, female-only carriages on trains, female-only taxis, are all aimed at preventing these kinds of crime. And these initiatives in themselves, just by existing, seem to constantly be stating to women that they are especially vulnerable, despite all actual criminal evidence to the contrary. So I suppose that raises an interesting question of where is all of this fear coming from? And it's at times like this that I can't help but think of the term rape culture.
It is hard to read an article like this and avoid the conclusion that we live in a culture that hates women, just hates us.
Because 1 in 4 young women is assaulted and society still asks, what was she wearing?
And I'm here to help women everywhere not get raped. Another expensive and fear-induced solution is to hire bodyguards. Will you protect me from rape?
Yes, ma'am.
We will.
But will you rape me?
Yes, ma'am.
We will.
It's hard to read an article like this and conclude that the men in this culture, boys and men in this culture, are raised to see women as not just less than them, but in some cases as less than human.
That's just part of what we know as rape culture. All the ideas and beliefs that make people think sexual violence is acceptable.
This constant message that 1 in 3, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 women are going to be raped or sexually assaulted in their lifetime. The idea that rape and sexual assault is somehow not only acceptable but also glorified in society. This constant push of a fear narrative to women that basically says every time you step foot outside your home, you might as well flip a coin on whether or not you're going to be raped. But if you stay in your home, it's probably a coin flip on whether or not your boyfriend or husband is going to rape you. To bring this back around full circle, the constant narrative and message of danger and fear around women, especially in regards to sexual assault and rape, seems to be leading to a climate in which women disproportionately fear for their safety compared to men. And this then leads to a fairly obvious and predictable outcome: greater demand for social protection of women. In this particular instance, this has manifested in the female-exclusive parking areas being provided, and being done so in line with the demands that these women are protected. The environment is large and spacious, with fewer small areas for rapacious individuals to conceal themselves. They are well lit, they are close to public areas, they are close to entrances and exits from buildings. All of this in line with this feminist demand that women should not have to feel unsafe when walking alone. And yet, when this demand is met, it is suddenly called sexism. And indeed, even in some places, it has received backlash from feminists. Not because of the fact that it was put there at their behest, but because of the increased size, which these feminists are now saying is problematic because it shows the inherent sexism of society, claiming that women are not as good at driving as men. Unfortunately, for those who would wish to make that claim, laboratory testing seems to disagree. In a paper published in 2009 entitled "Sex Differences in Parking Are Affected by Biological and Social Factors," a group of researchers took a small group of men and women and wondered if there was indeed any truth to the social idea that men are better at parking than women. They drew upon a very wide variety of previously already established patterns of cognitive ability that have objectively shown that men and women differ in their mental capacity, especially in regards to visualizing abstract forms mentally, rotating objects in a three-dimensional plane within their mind, etc. And all of these studies have shown on aggregate that these are tasks that men seem to fare better in than women. So when they asked their male and female volunteers to perform a simple parking maneuver, it came as no real surprise that men on average performed the parking maneuver faster and with a higher degree of accuracy. Obviously, we're looking at a variety of individuals here, so there were, of course, some women who excelled over some men, but as you can see here, the males represented by the black and females represented by the grey, on average, simply men are more likely to perform better. And this came even after controlling for amount of experience driving and parking, with men and women having about the same levels of experience. So, in conclusion, on this particular piece, what I think we're witnessing here is ultimately the feminist god of the gaps. Society is sexist and hates women, leaving women fearing for their safety, so society has to do something in order to protect women and make the world safe for women. But once you do that thing in line with the demands to make society safe for women, you're still sexist, and presumably still hate women. So it appears you are damned if you do and damned if you don't. What do we want? We don't know! When do we want it? Now!